As you pointed out, we exclaimed the same, oh, wow. So auspicious. And we're starting a new lunar cycle, actually. Yesterday was new moon and an eclipse. We know a couple of things about the Buddha already that are helpful to our training. We know that the Buddha, on the eve of his enlightenment, he specifically remarks, as he describes it, the important elements of that time, which really is the template, you could say, for his first turning of the wheel of teachings. Just before dawn, in an instant, in the single beat of a drum, the Bodhisattva understood. He understood the 12 links of dependent arising, a topic we will discuss in the future. He understood the Four Noble Truths, which you have heard about. And because of this instantaneous understanding, he became truly enlightened. My path has come to an end. My suffering has been pacified. Later, when the impermanence, that is, the leaving of a life, came into his experience, he understood very well, and he said, actually a later scripture said, that this passing is like a flame going out. A flame arises and a flame goes out, and this is how it is. So knowing that, there was one other thing that was said about when on the night of his enlightenment. Besides this, which a fire burns somewhere and goes out elsewhere. People should know the Buddha to come and go just so. So this was a description of what one is meant to understand when the Buddha died, when we die, when those close to us die. And we can couple this understanding with another point that was made on the night of his enlightenment. When a Buddha appeared to him, another Buddha, and said, just as we, meaning all we other Buddhas, have achieved awakening, so you have become a Buddha, just like butter and buttercream. Now this metaphor of butter coming about through the stirring of milk is an important metaphor for talking about Buddha nature, an important topic for us going forward. I just want to seed it here now. Nagarjuna, in his praise of the Dharmadhatu, which praise of reality, famously says that just when you churn milk, butter will come. You don't have to add anything to the milk. There's already the potential for butter there, right there in the milk. And so it is with us. We have the ingredients to produce awakening. Stir with practice, and awakening will come. So I want to introduce this metaphor now. We will have time to talk about it another day. The reason I bring these things up, his understanding of dependent arising, his understanding of impermanence, including death, his understanding that also death was not entirely the end. He says it's the end of my suffering. He doesn't say it's the end of my existence. And indeed, at the end, we are told that when he passes from suffering, he goes on to visit the various Buddha realms and teaches Indra and the gods in the various realms. So we also know about the Buddha that the first part of his life was the life of a young prince in India, a life of the senses, a life of pleasure, a life of luxury, such as that region and time allowed. And then he realized death. He realized impermanence in death when he saw the corpse, when he saw the sick person, and said, I must seek a way out of this. And he seeks enlightenment, as you know. For 6 years he trains with the Indian yogis of the period. And then he feels, well, there's something else I have to understand. And he goes and he sits under the Bodhi tree. He realizes dependent arising, part of which means realizing impermanence. Dependent arising means that things come about through causes, through cause and effect. If you do a certain action, there's a fruition of that. If you light a fire, the flame will grow, but it will also go out. Cause and effect comes about because of impermanence. Because a seed is impermanent, it can grow into a flower. Because the flower is impermanent, it will eventually dissolve. So Buddha knows, we know that Buddha has all these things, others also, in his awareness: dependent arising, cause and effect, impermanence, and also some kind of continuity after the bodily death. What I want to zero in on is the second part of his life. He seeks enlightenment, he achieves it. He spends 7 weeks, we're told, under the Bodhi tree thinking, I don't know if anybody's going to get what I have to say. Maybe I'll just sit here. And then eventually he is beseeched, actually by, I think it's Vishnu, who says, one of the Indian gods says, you must teach, you must teach. And you know, in India, Buddha is regarded as an incarnation of Vishnu, in Buddhism, which it is, an outgrowth of the earlier Indian traditions. So then he begins his teaching career, and that's what he does for the rest of his life. He's about 36 when he has his awakening. He lives to the age of 80, and he teaches until his last breath. His very last breath, he says, I have given you what you need to practice. Maintain vigilance. In other words, take care, do what you've been taught, and you too will die like I, implicitly. So, his teaching career. How does a person who has had this kind of experience in life teach other people? Since I'm a teacher, I think that's interesting. You know, what is skillful? A very famous teaching story, and we have many stories from the life of the Buddha about his teachings. They can comprise the bulk of a whole body of sutras. Sutras, you can look them up on the internet now. Many are translated. And one very famous teaching story is the teaching of a young woman known as Kisagotami. So by this time, the Buddha has taught the first turning of the wheel. He's taught the Four Noble Truths, which Lama Namgyal has talked about already. In teaching the Four Noble Truths, the first one, as you know, is unsatisfactoriness, often translated as suffering. Why is it things unsatisfactory? Well, a fundamental reason why things in the world are unsatisfactory doesn't mean we don't have pleasure at sometimes, but it's not fundamentally satisfying. Why? Because impermanence. Why? Because we will die, our loved ones will die, our houses will fall apart or need new roofs, or, you know, the flood ruins your living room, for example. So it's fundamentally unsuitable in terms of what we want. We want stability. We don't want impermanence. It has its good side. When bad things go wrong, we know that this too will pass. This too will pass. However, in terms of all of the things that we're attached to, which is most of what we're focused on most of the time, they will not last. What to do? One thing to do, in terms of the first noble truth, we're meant to recognize that this is how the situation is. And we're meant to recognize impermanence. It is said that impermanence of these various topics that we might meditate on, impermanence leaves the largest imprint, like the footprint of an elephant in the jungle. It's the biggest. It has profound impact to recognize impermanence. To really understand the first noble truth, it is developed in the teaching. One needs to recognize unsatisfactoriness, the inevitability of pain in this life, and samsara. Who avoids it? No one avoids it, no matter how rich you are, no matter how good you are. Pain comes, suffering comes. Impermanence, so suffering itself, impermanence, And then selflessness and emptiness are part of understanding the truth of the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, because to understand impermanence is to understand unsatisfactoriness, and it's also to begin to understand that things are not as solid as they seem. They are empty of the kind of solidity we attribute to them and to ourselves. And in this way, impermanence is a crucial turn on the path toward understanding the fundamentally liberating truths of selflessness and emptiness, which are topics down the road. But I want to mention how important impermanence is as a topic of meditation. When we do our foundational practices, it's the second of the four thoughts that turn our mind away from samsara. It's extremely important. You can read about it in Tantric Practice in Nyingma, among many other books, but our teacher, Keitsen Sambo, gives it's about 5 pages, a beautiful full disquisition on impermanence. Okay, so these are the teachings that we already know about. And then a young woman, Kisa Gotami, comes to the Buddha. What is her story? She was born a poor, low-caste Indian woman, but she married well. She was beautiful. And even so, her in-laws didn't treat her very well. She had a hard life until she had a son. She had a son that made her status, that made her family happy. She loved her son above all, the apple of her eye, the center of her life, really. And her son dies very young. She is desolate. She is pitiable. She walks around the village with her son's corpse in her arms and cries and weeps and is mad and won't bury him, won't let go of him, and is kind of going mad. And someone says, "Dear sister, go see the Buddha. He'll help you." So what do you think the Buddha will do? She comes to him and she says, "Lord, my son is dead, but you are the Buddha. You can bring him to life, surely." Don't we all hope for this when things go bad? What does the Buddha do, knowing all that he knows with his direct experience of life and death? He says, "All right, but first you must bring me a mustard seed. You must bring me a mustard seed from a family that has not known death. So you must ask. Before you receive the mustard seed and bring it to me, you must ask them if there is anyone who has died in the household." So of course she does this. She goes with great hope, no doubt, with great aspiration, thinking, I'm going to get. She knocks on the door. Door opens. "What can I do for you?" Please, can you give me a mustard seed?" "Of course I'll give you a mustard seed." But has anybody died?" "Oh yes, my wife's mother died last week." "Oh." She goes to the next house. Of course, you know, the same thing happens. Again, she's starting to see things a little differently. And by the end of the day, she's totally exhausted. She doesn't have a mustard seed because someone, my cousin, my own child, my grandmother, my daughter, everyone, there was death. She leaves her house-to-house hunting. She goes to the cemetery. She says, "Now I understand. Everyone will die. I am not the only one to lose a son." She buries him. She goes to the Buddha. She says, "I see now that everyone will die. There is no help for it. I will die. Everyone will die. Everyone has lost someone." The Buddha says, "Very good. You have understood. You have understood yourself." And then he teaches her. He gives her some more teaching. She immediately has a certain level of awakening. She becomes a nun. She asks the Buddha to make her a nun. She leaves that family. She becomes a nun for the rest of her life. And by the end of her life, she is the senior among nuns. And she is seated in the front of the row of nuns in a place of honor. And this is moving because, as another teaching on cause and effect and dependent arising, we are told the larger frame of her story is that when she was a young woman, infinite, who knows how many lives ago in the past, she came across a group of nuns, students of a former Buddha, not the historical Buddha, and she noticed that one nun was seated at the head of the group, and she felt, ooh, wouldn't it be wonderful to be, a realized woman sitting at the head of the nuns? And partly because of that, and part of her wish, and partly because of what she realized in speaking to the Buddha in this way, is she became that kind of nun herself. So this story encapsulates, for me, particularly, it's a teaching on dependent arising. Our aspirations matter. The fact that she had this aspiration was, we could say karmically, why she was so receptive to the Buddha's teaching, as she was. And also, the skill of the Buddha. He didn't lecture her. He didn't scold her. He didn't say, well, you have to realize, as I have, that all things are, that all things pass, and surely that wouldn't have worked. He wanted her to see for herself. He wanted her to come to our understanding through her own searching, which in effect was what she was doing. She was learning about impermanence. I mean, I feel impacted just imagining it, Imagine what it would be for her with her dead child in her arms. Give me a mustard seed and the Buddha will bring him back to life. Oh, but you too have known death. And in the end, she became awakened. Through the door of understanding impermanence. Impermanence is one of the key marks of existence. All conditioned phenomena are impermanent. And so we too practice to understand impermanence. We practice to recognize, like when we walk out today and wow, right? It's not hot anymore. The weather changes. The change in the weather is a teaching on impermanence. Longchenpa says this specifically. There's outer, inner, and secret impermanence in the way that Longchenpa puts it, and the way that our teacher Azam Rinpoche puts it, and his commentary is in my book, Being Human and a Buddha Too. So Longchenpa says, look around the world. Look around you. Oh, the weather has changed. The trees changed, less dramatically in Texas than in other places where we grew up, but they do change. The leaves fall. They turn color in most places. Even in Texas, they turn color some, right? And then in spring, things grow again. That's impermanence. A seed becomes a flower. The flower blooms. The petals fall. The seeds fall. The seeds grow. That's impermanence. Longchenpa says when you can see everything around you as a teaching, as an example of impermanence, you've mastered this very important teaching. Then there's also the important, and then it goes a little inner in terms of our emotional life. There's also the loss of people we love, pets we love, things we love that fall apart. Oh, my grandmother left me this beautiful crystal, and now half of it is broken. Right? We feel that. But people, living beings. And then we look in the mirror some days and, more signs, more wrinkles, a little gray. Or you look at a picture of yourself 5-10 years ago, right? Or you look at a picture of your mother when she was young. Wow. So we know. It goes a little deeper. Or Rinpoche also says there's the impermanence of our own thoughts. They arise and cease. They are not us. That anger that we have, that pride that we have, that career that we have, those excellent qualities that everybody praises us for and knows us for and that we identify with. Yes, they're wonderful gifts, these good qualities, but they are not us. We will not take them with us when we die, but we will continue. There are persons who have died. Everyone who is born dies. But there are no dead persons. This is a quintessential summation from one of our teachers from long ago. So the Buddha knew all these things. He knew a lot. He knew that her son wasn't really dead in the way that we consider dead, that her son would have gone on. But he didn't tell her stories about the son's future life or hers. He just said, go get a mustard seed. He said, see for yourself how life is. And that's impactful. And this is how one way that the Buddha famously taught impermanence, by pointing to something that one could see directly. And to this day, this is an important way of teaching in the Buddhist tradition. And so Buddha lays out the Eightfold Path. As you know, the Four Noble Truths. The fourth one is the path. So the story of Kisa Gotami is part of the teaching about the path. That's how her path unfolded, getting this instruction. I think Lama Namgyal has something. Do you want to say something about the path now?
I think we have to switch seats then.
Oh, we have to switch seats. See, even our seats are not permanent. Now, really, once you start looking, you do see it everywhere, right?
So that is one of Lama Rigdon's favorite tales.
It's pretty famous, it's not just me.
It's famous and favorite. So we're looking at the outline of the teachings and the events in Gautama Buddha's life. And we keep sort of going backwards and forwards. The impact of the young prince seeing somebody who's getting old for the first time, seeing somebody who's sick, a corpse, and then seeing a wanderer who has dedicated their lives to becoming free of the pain of repeated suffering, birth, suffering, and death. So he goes off, studies, ends up in Bodh Gaya, which literally means become Buddha. Sits under a tree. There's a descendant of the original tree still there, we think. Interestingly enough, the temple itself was buried under sand until early in the 19th century. And some British archaeologists rediscovered it. So I got to wonder about the tree a little bit.
Came from Ceylon.
Ceylon?
Yeah. But it was a descendant.
Yeah.
That's what I understand.
Sits down, I'm not going to get up until I understand this thing, and he does go through some diverse challenges, which are actually discussed in the reading that we'll have today, and comes to understand, and part of the understanding is what's called the Four Truths, with the first being suffering, the second being that there's a cause, which is clinging tightly, and that there's an end to the whole round of it. That end is called nirvana. And then there's a path to that end, which has 8 parts to it. One of our teachers, Geshe Wangyal, we called him Bakshi, which just means teacher in Mongolian, once asked me, Harvey, why are there 8 parts to the Eightfold Path? I never could come up with an answer, and he never gave me an answer. But it was delightful to have him ask me, why are there 8 parts to it? Such an interesting question. He was a very interesting teacher. One never knew exactly what he was doing when he was talking to you. So one way it's taught, the first aspect of the Eightfold Path is right view. It's understanding how things arise from causes and conditions, that there is this repetitiveness of unsatisfactoriness that has to do with the way we work our mind and our intentionality. That it all can stop, and that the whole process of rebirth and the sufferings associated with rebirth can cease, a state called nirvana, and that there is a way to do it. There are things we can do that conduce to bringing it all to an end. The second of the Eightfold Path, traditionally they talk about renunciation and sort of non-hate, non-harmfulness, even-mindedness. When I hear renunciation, I just would say it's a very, very important word in the tradition. But I was thinking about how can we most effectively take that in. Renunciation is really within a moral framework, and it's important to hear the traditional moral framework for the teachings. But I think one interesting way to think of renunciation is to think of reflection. If we can bring reflection into our overall repertoire of life, it's a kind of momentary pause where, rather than I know that that person hates me, we just reflect for a moment. I have the sense that that person hates me, but I could be wrong. It's just, they're another person, they're separate. I'm reflecting, they're a separate and completely different individual. I may be assuming wrong. Just that moment of reflection can give a little space to reactivity. I've got to have that chocolate bar right now. I notice that I want a chocolate bar. I feel what it feels like to want a chocolate bar. It's renunciation in that moment. You're not grabbing for the chocolate bar, but there's also reflection. I'm just sort of noticing the whole mechanism of wanting a chocolate bar and how it affects my mind and how it affects my body. There's a right attitude, a right intention. There's a kind of attitude of reflection, renunciation. So, being aware of our time, I'm just going to press the pause button. We'll probably resume with, we've briefly talked about right view and right attitude. We'll resume our conversations about the Eightfold Path. But now we are at the moment of starting our Sunday morning, October 15th, meditation practice. Are you it?
Is there time for a quick question?
One question.
Okay. Could you